gosto que vou moderar este primeiro painel deste seminário sobre as abordagens interdisciplinares na pesquisa sobre a deficiência. O meu nome é Fernando Serra e sou docente e investigador neste Instituto e coordeno, desde 2013, a unidade de coordenação, ou se quiser, do Departamento de Serviço Social e Política Social. Gostava também de agradecer à professora Paula Pinto, a minha querida colega, que me convidou para moderar esta primeira mesa redonda, e é com muito gosto que o faço. O tema é muito interessante, relevante para os investigadores e estudantes do doutoramento que aqui se encontram. Trata-se de olharmos para a pesquisa participativa e emancipatória e percebemos os desafios e os problemas de natureza ética que levantam bastantes. O próprio Alberto Vasquez, na primeira parte desta sessão, foi muito claro quanto aos contornos desses problemas e desses desafios, e portanto esta mesa redonda tem como objetivo prosseguir nesse debate também com a vossa participação. Tenho comigo três pessoas de referência neste domínio, Jerome Bickenbach e o Clarke. É com gosto também que estou a guiar por estes três especialistas. E gostava também de identificar algumas dos aspectos das suas longas biografias. Eu vou só aqui resumir a parte essencial da sua trajetória profissional, e vou começar pelo Clarke. É vice-presidente do Fórum Europeu da Deficiência, tendo-se aposentado como diretor executivo da Down Syndrome Ireland e como presidente, no passado, da Down Syndrome International. Clarke foi presidente da Federação de Deficientes da Irlanda e trabalhou como diretor do Children's Rights Alliance Ireland. E foi membro do corpo diretivo da Aliança Internacional da Deficiência. Foi membro do Comitê do Conselho da Europa, responsável da investigação sobre a participação das pessoas com deficiência na vida política e pública. O seu trabalho com a Federação Irlandesa da Deficiência, o Fórum Europeu da Deficiência e a Aliança Internacional da Deficiência confere então esta perspectiva pan-europeia, internacional, global, sobre todas as questões relacionadas com a deficiência. É um defensor da plena inclusão das pessoas com síndrome de Down, em particular, de todas as pessoas com deficiência em geral, na sociedade e a todos os níveis. E informo também que ele tem um filho, David, de 37 anos, que tem síndrome de Down. Jerome é diretor da Unidade de Política de Deficiência da Swiss Paraplegic Research, professor titular do Departamento de Filosofia nas Faculdades de Direito e Medicina de Queen's University. Participou em quase todas as atividades de revisão e continua a prestar consultoria à Organização Mundial de Saúde no âmbito da divulgação da CIF, Classificação Internacional de Funcionalidade, como se bem, e de Política Social Internacional sobre Deficiência. A sua pesquisa em estudos sobre deficiência utiliza técnicas de pesquisa qualitativa e quantitativa dentro do paradigma da pesquisa da ação e da pesquisa participativa. A sua pesquisa recente inclui temáticas como qualidade de vida, perspectiva crítica sobre a deficiência, epidemiologia da deficiência, desenho universal de inclusão, etc. São vários os tópicos. Como advogado, foi um litigante de direitos humanos, especializado em ações de combate à discriminação de pessoas com deficiência intelectual e doença mental. Finalmente, Megan é uma ativista dos direitos das pessoas com deficiência, com experiência na liderança de programas de intercâmbio, direitos humanos e desenvolvimento na Ásia Central e do Sul, no Médio Oriente, Norte da África e América do Sul. Tem mais de 12 anos de experiência profissional a trabalhar com organizações de pessoas com deficiência em todo o mundo, e o seu trabalho tem centrado nos direitos das sobreviventes de minas terrestres e mulheres com deficiência nos Estados Unidos Austrália, Afeganistão e Camboja. Mais recentemente, trabalhou na defesa das pessoas com deficiência no sistema das Nações Unidas, através da sua posição na Unicef, Camboja, e como responsável pelo tema Género e Desenvolvimento na International Disability Alliance, em Nova Iorque. Tem um mestrado em Paz e Resolução de Conflitos pela Universidade de Queensland e é atualmente doutoranda na Universidade de Islândia no âmbito deste projeto que acolhe este evento. A sua pesquisa está focada nas implicações bioéticas dos testes pré-natais e da deficiência fetal na Islândia e na Irlanda. Very interesting topic of research in your PhD. Portanto, são os nossos convidados e nós temos algum tempo, cerca de 1h30 para este evento. Vamos reservar um tempo para perguntas e respostas, comentários, reações, mas antes disso gostava de colocar algumas questões aos nossos convidados. Gostava de começar pela primeira, relacionada com no entender de cada um, quais serão as características ou os atributos fundamentais da pesquisa participativa e da pesquisa emancipatória. Provavelmente muitos daqueles que desenvolvem a investigação poderão não estar tão familiarizados com estas abordagens, que no âmbito dos estudos de deficiência são abordagens incontornáveis, fundamentais, e portanto vamos saber a opinião de pessoas que desenvolvem a investigação neste campo e saber então colocar a primeira questão. Vou começar pelo Pat, acerca, portanto, das características, na sua opinião, que apresentam as pesquisas emancipatórias, participativas. E já agora pergunto a cada um dos presentes exemplos concretos de pesquisas que tenham desenvolvido ou que tenham conhecimento neste âmbito. Pat, the floor is yours. I don't know if the question was correctly posed.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando. Thank you for inviting us here. Inviting us to be here today. Yes, in relation to the topic, it is vitally important to involve and consult persons with disabilities and their representative organisations in all policies and decisions that impact on the lives of persons with disabilities, including relevant to our topic today, including that in research. And to be most effective, this should be done at a very early stage of the research and all throughout the research process. As a quick aside, the European Disability Forum would be an example as a contact point for that. And European Disability Forum is the umbrella, pan-European, pan-disability organisation, an umbrella's umbrella, so to speak, representing between 80 and 100 million European citizens with disabilities. It's involved, it's got all of the national umbrella bodies as its members, and also has all of the significant European NGOs that deal with that. But researchers should ensure, and EDF, just to finish that, would be quite a big resource and a contact point for researchers if we want to get involved if we're researching in this area. So they should ensure that supported decision making is respected for persons with disabilities who are deprived of their legal capacity, and that informed consent is obtained before interviewing or involving persons with disabilities in your research. Ways of interviewing and involving persons with disabilities should ensure that they are all accessible to all persons with disabilities, which includes using alternative formats of communications and providing materials in Braille, ensuring sign language interpreters, but also to ensure the use of respectful terminology in the process. And you should contact DPOs in relation to this so that you are properly informed before you engage with people with disabilities in your research. Likewise, we would feel that the results of the research should be made accessible to all persons with disabilities, to participants, in all formats, including easy to read for persons with intellectual disabilities.
Thank you very much. So I ask the same question to Jerome. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a very privilege of mine to be here. One of the issues that always strike me with terms like emancipatory and participatory, we sometimes get lost in the cloud of the embrace of these terms in the abstraction. And over the years, as I get older and less patient, I look for concrete examples of what this means in practice. So let me just swoop down to the practical level and give you some examples that I mentioned in our conference a couple days ago. In one of the research projects that I had, we worked with a community living organization in Canada, and we first of all engaged in them at a preliminary level to discuss what questions they found interesting. So at the issue of right at the beginning, what is a researchable question? What's the problem? What do you find it to be a problem? And we, as researchers and activists and NGOs, negotiated at the level of that. And then we said, okay, how should we design this? How should we look? What should we be looking at? Interviewing people? Who should we interview? So the design of the research was collaborative. And then we looked at, well, how should we plan it? What funding should we seek? And what methodology, and what sort of dissemination, what should we have planned for implementing our research and practice? And then in our application, we insisted that those groups be funded so that we could fund the development of research skills in the participants of the community living center. So what we're doing is providing them with the capacity development in research techniques, which they lacked. So here's an example of, I don't know, but certainly participatory, and maybe a wee touch of emancipatory research. Because the idea is not participation in a real collaborative sense, not token participation, and also something which leaves with your research partners, leaves them with an increased capacity so that they can use that for their own purposes as they wish. And I would just contrast this with something which I think is a phony emancipatory, a phony participation, but very, very common. And that is advisory groups. Now, we have a little controversy about this, so I will just skim to the top. It is very often the case that you put on research proposals a scientific advisory expert panel group. And then you chuck in all the people that you really don't want to have anything to do with, but you want them there because it looks good on the application. And often NGOs and civil society and people with disabilities organizations find themselves in that role. Now, it was an embarrassment for DARE when it was discovered that our scientific advisory board hasn't even yet been informed that we got the grant. We don't know that. So that gives you a sense of how distant this group is. So that, to me, is not participatory research. I think it borders on a kind of tokenism, where you just put entities in as placeholders instead of as participants.
Thank you, Jerome, for your interesting approach. And Megan, what about your experience and examples?
So I like to start out by asking for accommodation, and my voice is a little bit muddled, so if you cannot understand me, please interrupt me. And that goes to the translator as well. And if I stop, I would request that you hang out with me for a couple minutes until I get my voice back. Sound good? So, as Fernando said about my current research, it's on how parents and individuals are making choices about prenatal testing and fetal impairment. So that's diagnosis of different impairments of a fetus. And this is countries that I'm studying, so Iceland and Ireland, and the nature of my research, I'm asking the most personal questions of how people reproduce, who they want to reproduce, what kind of child they're envisioning. So these come at a really, really sensitive, vulnerable place for a lot of people. So for me, emancipatory or participatory research comes down to accountability. So sort of beyond the accountability of the ethics community or within academia, but rather accountability to the people that I'm learning from. So I do have parents with disabilities that I would be interviewing, but also on an intersectional level, I'm interviewing queer parents with disabilities, queer parents of color. So there's all these identities that I don't belong to. So I'm learning what their communities are prioritizing and needing. So in my research, I have to consistently be accountable to what their priorities are. So I really love, when I say accountability, I love this definition given by an activist in California. I'm Californian.
It's good or it's bad?
Good point.
Depends on your political. But she says that accountability is not a destination. It is a skill that we build and we practice. It's an art, it's a craft, it's an alchemy that we have to practice and we have to wield. So, this is sort of the basis, even though it's very hypothetical and arching. This is the practice that I am trying to work with my participants. So seeing what their priorities are, how my research can address those, and working together on that level.
Thank you. Let's move to our second questions related to the difference between the conventional, let us say, conventional research and this new approach of research. Is there a difference in ethical aspects, or do you think there are singularities among them? I don't know if I'm correct in saying this in English, provavelmente será melhor dizer em português. A minha questão é a seguinte: colocam-se naturalmente questões éticas à investigação clássica ou convencional. Uma das questões é o consentimento informado, é uma questão transversal a todas as investigações. A minha questão, e provavelmente a dúvida de muitos dos presentes, será saber se desenvolver investigação participativa e emancipatória, com as características que foram definidas pelos nossos convidados, se é diferente ou não, se acrescenta especificidade. So I will now begin with Megan Smith. It's your turn. Yes. I'm switching the order. It's not a stable order.
So I looked at this question and I honestly don't know how to compare with conventional research. and I don't really know what that is. But I do know that in the past I've worked in more the international development sector, which is very, very conservative in how they interact with their beneficiaries. So, for example, in Afghanistan and Cambodia, I was researching the lives of women, and it was always using this word that I think is a dirty word, at least in the international development context, which is empowerment. I really, and I know that.
Go for it, Rebecca.
I know that it has a different context in the disability research and disability rights world, but at least in the international development context, it really did mean foreign people with money coming in to perpetually empower women, minorities, people of color from the global south. So, and the empowerment seemed like a never-ending process, where only one group needed empowerment. So, coming into disability research, I really avoid using that word, even though it does mean different things for disability studies. So when and that's sort of to say, within my own research, this comes into play when I'm soliciting information from my participants. So a bulk of my research is based on interviewing people about their private lives. And so, and especially women with disabilities. So I have, I would say I'm a very pessimistic person, and I'm approaching my research in a way where my goal is to do no further harm. I don't want to perpetuate any exploitative hierarchies or norms. So with that, and if I add value to the community, which is the fundamental aspect of emancipatory research, if I end up adding value at the end, I'm super happy that this is my approach at the beginning. So just really quickly to give a concrete example is, again, I'm using a term that I really like, which is forced intimacy. And it was coined by Mia Mingus, who's an activist, and she defines it as the daily experience of disabled people being expected to share personal experiences, personal parts of themselves, to survive in an ableist world. So I know as a woman with a disability, throughout my career, I've been asked to talk about the most personal experiences for a learning experience for other people. And it's always a one-way experience. So this is to say in my research, because the whole goal is to get so personal, I am discussing boundaries and what kind of information that my participants would like to share, at what time, and how they would like that information to be framed. So.
It's hard to
to form. It's easy enough to identify some of the obvious faults with so-called conventional research. I won't stop with it. I won't go into them. Treating people as guinea pigs, as subjects, and you just look at them, you focus on them and don't elicit from them their own participation. It's easy to criticize, but more positively, there is a challenge to participatory research. The kind of research that this consortium is engaged in is typically characterized as qualitative research, the primary methodology for which is interviewing. Now, one of the challenges of participatory research, just a technical, practical problem, is if you have the motivation, the inspiration to be participatory, and you're engaged in a methodology of interviewing people, you are caught in a challenge, in a dilemma between neutrality. You don't want to change the data that you're collecting by forcing your views on people, which is a very important thing. You want the data to be elicited honestly. On the one hand, so you're pulling back, you're being neutral. On the other hand, a participatory mode of research involves you interacting in a human way with people so that the interaction becomes collaborative. Now there's a tension between being neutral and being collaborative in that sense. And what is difficult is to cast an interview as a scientific activity in a way which makes that balance, deals with that balance in a productive way. And one of the things that has come to mind is to use the model of supportive decision-making as an appropriate model, which comes from the Article 12 universe of looking at how to engage with people with compromised communication or other kinds of compromises, and how to support their decision-making in a real context. Well, it is possible, I think, and just leave it with this, that the interview mechanism is a methodology which does have to have a structure, interview guide. It has to ask questions in a regular way, or the data is not, the research is compromised. But to do it in a supportive way, so that you are interacting, negotiating in a sense, with the person that who is providing the experiential data that you want to capture. The point here is that participatory research isn't simple, isn't easy. It takes a challenge, not only to put aside the old-fashioned way of doing things, but actually more proactively to create new ways of doing research. A challenge.
Thank you.
I guess so. Okay, if I was originally following Megan, if we can think back that far, one of the first things that Megan said in her first intervention was accountability. And I think this is an issue that we must keep in mind. It is most important to keep in mind, in terms of the ethics, is the participants' mental well-being and their mental health. So if we ask a person personal questions, it could potentially re-traumatize them. But it also has the possibility to heal, and for that person to be heard in a way that they may not have been heard before. So it's a good idea, in our view, or in my view, for the researcher to acquire, as a researcher, the necessary skills and be aware of this at all times. Now, as an example of this, a good number of years ago, when I was Executive Director of Down Syndrome Ireland, we did a piece of research on bullying, and we ended up with a very nice report. But we went out of our way, we trained the number of investigators. We had a limited number of them, we gave them very good training, and we enabled them to get an awful lot of follow-up. We enabled the participants to avail of a lot of follow-up contact with them to resolve any of the issues that arose during their interviews, and that went on for quite some time. And before the report was published, we again engaged with all of the participants again to make sure that They were happy with what was in there, even though it was all anonymous, but they were happy that they could stand over or be comfortable with this book when it was published, and perhaps even to be part of the launch of that particular booklet at that point in time. So those are the sort of things you need to do. Some people who take part in research may feel that they've been exploited. The research got their information and then that's it. They don't hear from them again. And they don't follow up, call or email as to how the person is doing in the few days after the event. It is of utmost importance in our view to keep in contact with your participants, to make sure that they are okay following the interviews and keep them updated on the research process. And think about what you can give back to them, particularly if it's an ongoing piece of work, and consult with them on the outcomes as the interviewer, and before adding it to any of the final research findings. So that encapsulates. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Temos entre nós conjunto de investigadores, fresh starters, investigadores que estão a iniciar o seu processo de doutoramento, eventualmente outros investigadores séniores. E a terceira questão é uma questão mais diretamente relacionada com estes investigadores. E entendendo que temos investigadores séniores deste lado, a minha terceira questão é no sentido de nos perguntar o que poderão aconselhar aos jovens investigadores, aos investigadores em fase de início da sua carreira, que se dedicam a estas temáticas, que tipo de lição ou de experiência fundamental é que eles poderão recomendar. E vou começar pelo Pat.
Okay, what we would say is that you have to work very closely with representative organisations of persons with disabilities to overcome and be aware of the different issues that you might encounter while undertaking the research. These organisations would be an umbrella like the European Disability Forum, but also the European disability-specific organisations like the European Union of the Deaf, the European Blind Union, or European Down Syndrome, or whatever. There is upwards of 30 European umbrella organisations that are there, and they are a tremendous resource that you just need to tap into at different points. So if working on a national level, then an engagement with the national organisations, even within the disability-specific sector, or the umbrella organisations would be beneficial. As I say, when interviewing a deaf person, you could consult the European Union of the Deaf, and that will give you a good insight. It will also help you work with the terminology, as I mentioned earlier. We spoke over the past few days about accessibility, which was a big topic. So when planning the issuing of your results or the materials, it is vitally important to make the results accessible to each of the relevant groups. A person with intellectual disabilities will need a document in easy to read, and for this you can contact Inclusion Europe in Brussels to assist you in producing an easy to read report. But there are other formats and other ways of which will be available on the slides here from an accessible point of view that we've discussed over the last few days. So that's one of the areas that you need to be taking into consideration.
Thank you, Pat.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to start from the concrete and move to the vague, amorphous, and aspirational. The first one, I would never thought I'd get in a position to say. That sounds really what happens when you get too old. But my advice to ESRs is learn from the past. Yesterday we had the experience of Dr. Priestley talking about the inception ideas of participatory research in the 90s, what the challenges, the motivations from which the whole notion of emancipatory research grew. And understanding the history, understanding we all stand on the shoulders of women and men who have come before us, and it's always important, and this is what I give student advice, always important to know where that voyage has gone in the past. There are best practices. Sometimes they go out of fashion, but they're still the best practices. And to understand where the notion of the desire, the yearning for participation came from, and what early researchers had to do to make sense of it, is very important. You just have to, it's very important to know that. So the second bit of advice contradicts that flatly, which is okay. And that is be creative, innovative, and transformative. And look, I mean, you have models of research, books filled with methodologies and patterns, and you don't need to know these, obviously, from point one. But don't feel that you have to follow in that step to be legitimate. It was long ago when I was a PhD student, late 1800s, as I recall. But even at that point, there is an almost overwhelming pressure to fit in a model, to become something, to become an identity. And how you become something, researcher, PhD, is to find a role and stick to it very well, so that you can be identified by other people. Oh, there's one. They're doing what researchers do. So it's really important, though, to keeping those pressures in mind, be as innovative, creative, and transformative as you can. The ESRs in this room have no problem, as Megan is making very clear. The last thing is really wishy-washy, fuzzy. Sorry about that. Be courageous. Be courageous, because it takes courage to do this. And be true to yourself at the same time. Don't try to become something other than you are, because what you are is not only precious and wonderful, but it is also something which will never leave you. You're sort of stuck with it anyway. But having it come out in an innovative way, responding to the kinds of needs and issues that all of us are desperately trying to make sense of and to help you, it's important to have the courage to be yourself. Now, does that sound trite?
Yes.
I don't know what can I do. Sometimes the thing about platitudes is they're actually true. I mean, so sometimes you say the same thing over again because it's very important. The courage to be yourself. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we're going on for 2 hours.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah. I mean, I'm an early stage researcher, so I'm learning as well. But I will say, you have to know yourself and how you have, in terms of the relationship that you have with your research and the research participants. So, as a white Californian physically disabled woman, there is also funded by a EU program. I wield a lot of power in a lot of different situations. How that interacts, I'm learning from. So I think that is my main recommendation is in each situation, know where you stand or sit.
Thank you, Megan. I call you, sorry, I call you Pat. Sorry, that's so nice.
I don't mind.
I should use this term. Thank you very much for your insightful and very relevant experience. I think to reach your own approach on this issue. So now I will ask the audience to join us and to make questions, comments, reactions, ask for some help, especially for concerning the fresh starters. So the space of the word is here. We have some time, so
I understand English, but I prefer speaking Portuguese, if you don't mind. Okay. Eu sou uma pessoa muito deficiente e costumo receber em casa online vários formulários para preencher, para auxiliar estudantes de doutoramento. Continuo ao dispor. Achei muito interessante já agora, deixe-me só fazer uma ponta entre a comunicação com o Alberto há bocado e esta. O Alberto há bocado disse, e eu concordei plenamente com. Nunca tinha pensado nisso, porque eu não era o objeto de tratamento, mas devia ser considerado uma right holder relativamente ao tratamento ou ao cuidado. Mas eu não me importo ser objeto de investigação. Ponho ao dispor da investigação sempre que for preciso, porque apesar de ser individualmente considerado, eu acho que posso dar um grande contributo para a investigação. E, portanto, não posso concordar muito com duas coisas que disseram. Primeiro, que só as organizações de IPOs é que devem ser perguntadas as coisas, porque acho que as pessoas individualmente consideradas também são importantes, até porque podem estar um bocadinho ao site das instituições. E depois, também eu, se for eu especial, mas nunca traumatizaria ser entrevistada. E mais que podia acontecer era não responder a questões mais que parecessem mais tábuas. Sei que para mim não há questões tábuas, mas isto foi consideravelmente que. Portanto, eu ponho ao dispor dos investigadores que estão na sala, ou que já estão, já disseram, para alguma questão ou alguma entrevista que queiram fazer.
Desculpe o seu nome.
Maria Helena Garval.
Well, appreciate it. Yeah, just to respond to this, I think this is a really useful dialogue, and Megan already revealed that many disabled people and disabled women are often approached by researchers to talk about their intimate life experiences. And you use the phrase to put yourself at the disposal of researchers. And I think we have to reverse that. We have to understand that emancipatory or participatory research is also about researchers putting themselves at the disposal of disabled people and their organisations. It's understanding what Jerome said and Pat said also about the agenda setting for the research. How do we identify problems that need to be researched? Well, disabled people have been saying for decades what the problems are. We know what the problems are. And it should be our job as researchers to help in trying to change those situations. That does not always mean interviewing disabled people. Sometimes that creates harm, as you say. Maybe it's more helpful to disabled people to go and research the statistics, or to analyse the policies, or interview the politicians about their intimate experiences, or whatever. Yeah. But our job should be, it is about putting our collective skills at the disposal of disabled people and their organisations, not the other way around. Although Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be many students queuing to interview you today.
Perhaps
Could I just respond before Melissa comes in?
react to these questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. I mean, what you're raising actually at the end of the day is the ethics of research more broadly. And we haven't really sort of confronted the ethical foundations of the endeavor. But it's very important, especially for ESRs, to realize, there's a careers going on here, there's a livelihood, there's a métier, there are other kinds of features that involve you, but your role as a researcher is a highly socially significant role that has by virtue of its potential for social value, creates obligations in you. And what we are doing up here at this table, what Mark is suggesting, is giving you a sense of what those obligations entail in the case of participatory research. And primarily what it entails is that the questions, the issues that are raised from, as we say, the bottom up, are raised from people and not imposed from literature reviews or from previous research. And that is a hard habit to break on the part of researchers, to realize that the source of what is a question that needs research should come from the people for whom it primarily affects. Years ago I did research with people with spinal cord injury, paraplegia, tetraplegia, and we have two focus groups, one of the physicians who attended to those people and one of the people themselves, and compared, very simply, the question, what is the most urgent need on the part of these individuals? And we were astonished by the fact that the professionals never, ever identified the needs that the people themselves addressed or raised as the needs that they would feel research needs to be carried on. And that is really an eye-opener for a researcher to realize that if you want your research to have an impact that's valuable and to fulfill your obligations as a partner in social research, you have to understand that the source of the issues have to be from the people who are primarily affected by it. It doesn't mean you have to actually research people with disabilities, as you're saying, because those issues may be things that require you to focus your qualitative strengths on certain very technical issues in bureaucracy or administration. That is the most benefit. But the source of the issues must come from people themselves.
My comment on that to you is just thank you for being you. I think it's very refreshing and very good. And I am sure, as Mark said, that a lot of the present ESRs will be queuing up to pester you for the rest of the afternoon. So thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Marissa Diaz, and I'm an early stage researcher. I focus on end of life and palliative care. So obviously a big question for me in thinking about my research is actual participation, and I had to think about what people were saying and what people want, and sometimes it takes a lot of creative thinking but also a lot of creative listening. So many people have asked me, how do you incentivize participating in research for people who inherently, by being in palliative care, have so limited time? What makes them want to participate in research? And that was a question I had when I first got on this journey. And often their answers in previous research was simply because they wanted to have their voice heard. They wanted to add to the conversation. And sometimes it is that simple. Sometimes I felt patronizing to think it was that simple, but it's what people were saying. So I think it also takes listening from the researchers. not only about what people are saying about why they want to participate in research, but what kind of research they want to participate in. And especially when we are working with groups who, in my case, very specifically don't have a lot of time, it takes maybe an extra little bit of thinking creatively and listening a lot.
Yes.
My name is Jerome. My question is, if you decide to involve people in the research in certain the research design, and they tell you something completely different than your focus. What would you do? Like, for example, you go to victims of sexual violence, and your agenda is to look for access to justice issues. And they say to you that we don't care about. We want economic environment issues to be addressed. How do you then reconcile those issues?
Okay, I'll take a stab at it. I'll give you what I would do. I would enter a mode of, I'm a lawyer too, Roberto. I'll enter into a mode of negotiation. Because it is a collaboration, and you must have some reason for thinking that the issue that you, or your design, as you were saying, is an appropriate one. So you have a case to make for your design, and then you may ask for the case to be made for another issue or other design, and see in that interaction if there's some way to satisfy both parties. One would be nice, or to have some combination of things that both of you would be engaged in. Participatory research doesn't mean that the people that you're engaged with are calling the shots on every item. That's not participation. That's aberration. I mean, so in this, it is a dialogue. It's a collaborative activity, and it should never stop being a collaborative activity. And that means there are two sides to negotiate. That would be my intuition, but I don't know what
I mean, I actually had an interesting experience that I think relates to your question, which is, from my understanding, which was, if you have participants that are giving you information that is not necessarily your research questions or on topic. And I found not just one, but multiple people that I'm going to interview have actually presented sort of off-topic, but their own priorities for my research. And so I've actually sort of moved the target of some of my research questions to respond to what I was receiving from them. And again, it wasn't just one participant, but it was multiple. But that was my experience.
We have. Yes.
Thank you all. That's really.
Your name, please.
Oh, sorry. I'm Anna Lawson from the University of Leeds. And yes, first of all, thank you to the panel and to these questions, really interesting discussions. I have a question, I guess. I think it's a question rather than a comment. I was picking up on what Pat said about the power of research to have healing effects as well as damaging effects if it's dealt with in appropriate ways. And Also, Jerome's focus on participatory research. And I was thinking about the term participatory action research and the focus on community building that's often linked with emancipatory research, I guess, on connecting people through the research with other people working in the area, with just using the research as a tool to create awareness of activism on the subject and a community around the subject. And I was wondering whether you regard, all three of you really, think of participatory action research as something different from participatory research or part of it, or whether you use the terms synonymously.
Perhaps we could join the second question.
My name is Rame. I'm from the University of Iceland. It's really a response to Eddie's comment, because I have several projects where what I thought I would be researching was not really what was a burning issue for the people who participated in the research. And it depends on the project, how you can address that. If you are doing research that you have decided on your own, you're not restrained by a funder or a preconceived, thing that you applied to do. You compete with others to get this grant, to do this research that has been identified on beforehand, what you focus on. If you have that kind of research, and we did, we had research that focused on, we applied for European research that we were tasked for European countries to look at the access to victim support for women with disabilities who have experienced violence. That was what the funder gave us to do. And then, last week was, decided that scope that I opened to, and we funded to do it. So when we came to talk to the women, what was burning for them was not access to what the funder called them entitled victim, specialized victim support services. What they wanted was access to justice. They wanted to have it recognized that they had been violated and that there should be repercussions, and that they should, that should be acknowledged how awfully they have been treated. So so what did we do with that? That was one of the major findings of the research. Even if we were not supposed to look at it, it became one of the major findings and our recommendation of what the future research should need to look at. In other research projects that, we just changed the research to focus on totally different issues. I mentioned this earlier with a group. We wanted to talk to disabled women with intellectual disabilities as leaders in the self-advocacy movement, and they did not want to talk about that. They wanted to talk about forced abortion or forced sterilization and how they could become mothers. And so, for 30 years, I focused on that, partly in my research in collaboration with others. So it really depends on the project. But if it's a burning issue for the people who are participating in the research, you cannot ignore it. It has to be there as acknowledged as an important finding, even if it's outside what you originally thought you were focusing on.
Do you want to react or comment?
Just reacting to Anna's, I think participative reaction research, I think would be a logical extension of it, depending on it might logically follow from your initial engagement and just see how that develops. I know that we would have had one or two instances of that when I was working with Down syndrome Ireland at the time. So yes, I think it is an extension of where participative research would be made.
Just to comment on Anna's, and then maybe back to the previous guy question. I I know. I mean, participatory action research in the 90s and early 2000s had a focus primarily on community development issues and issues of empowerment at the community level. Very important issues. What I find intriguing is in social sciences more generally, there has been a tradition developing the last 10 years or so called implementation research, or implementation science, even it's called. And it has had a really heavy impact on social science, health-related medicine, health-related research, but in other areas as well. And it's actually a form of participatory action research at the end of the day. It is focused on what is called evidence-based policy development. And what that means is that researchers should be focused as a consequence of the impact of their research should be focused on ways of ensuring that their research has an impact, has a genuine effect. So it's not enough anymore to publish papers and disseminate your results. That's not the end of research, as now understood. The end of research is actually taking that additional step and seeking ways of bringing it to the attention of those people, CRPD committee, for example, bring it to the attention of people who can then run with it, can take it and make changes, or bring it into force, into practice. And in the policy area, this is done through some very well-defined implementation strategies where you can actually get things into impact, have the impact realized. Now, when I'm saying all this is that I think the PAR insight, the participatory action research insight, has actually transformed into this now really mainstream activity of ensuring that all social science research has an implementation phase to it. So I think that counts as the sort of the mainstreaming of the participatory action research paradigm. I may be wrong on this, but certainly all the research that we engage in our institute, it has this implementation component to it.
I suppose only that I think the most interesting participatory action research that I have read and experienced was regarding social justice movements. And so I often, rightly or wrongly, associate this participatory action research with advocacy, with applied research. Which I'm sure participatory research is also within that category, but I've seen definitely its application with social justice.
Two more questions. Taking advantage of so many academics around and people in early stage, how to deal with this discussion about ethics in participatory research, in emancipatory research, and this pressure from universities and journals to publish. It's called publish or perish, people say. Yes. Because it probably compromises to some extent what we're discussing. So I would like to hear something around that.
The second one, yes.
Hi, I'm Eliona. I'm also an ESR, early stage researcher. Based in the University of Leicester. Mine is more so a comment than a question. I'd really like to combine with the panelists. Alberto Andelete from Portugal said something that really stood with me. It wasn't the lady putting herself at our disposal, it was more what she said about she being ready to contribute to research. And that stuck with me about contribution, together with what Megan said about forced invasion of privacy. And I would really like to highlight that it really depends on the topic of research, how ready people will be to participate, but also it's important in any type of participatory research to include those maybe more shy voices as well, not just the powerful. And I'm speaking as a disabled, powerful and ready to participate research. And it is great to see, I don't know if you could call it a co-disability activist person from Portugal. It's great to see us, I don't know what I would call myself, Albanian, Irish, Icelandic, Spanish, and so on. So that was a comment, just in terms of participation, how you're working against to include all of this. Thank you.
Is there another question? No? Okay. Comments? Reactions?
Well, let me address Alberta. I didn't step in, folks. I mean, obviously, this is it's our challenge. I mean, the established research committee, the students are blessedly free from, well, not really, actually. They're confronting it as well, because their PhDs have a certain format requirements that are not to be too biblical or adamantine. You can't change them, they're like rocks. So you have to address them. So compromises of that sort seem inevitable, but at the same time, I think the system can be played very successfully. And you can actually keep up the emancipatory, participatory activity in most university contexts and not really struggle to finish your PhD. I mean, the publishing is another area, and we are constant. In disability studies, there are far more venues for publications than there were 20, 30 years ago, that's for sure. In other journals, which were not normally disability studies journals, are more willing to accept research in this area. So things are better than they are, but it's a constant struggle. I mean, it's just one paradigm conflicting with another, and you work your way through it.
Well,
you don't have to polish. You know what's that.
Sorry, Clarke, actually I was going to come back to the just as an example. I don't think it's a problem. I mean, collaborating with people in co-production of research is an opportunity. The project we did with EDF, at least Wellington and I collaborated with EDF. We produced 2 peer-reviewed journal articles from that project, co-authored with the General Secretary. So we had a multinational, cross-sectoral authorship. My colleague, Andrea, who's not here, some people know, does very involved participatory work with people with learning difficulties in around sexual violence and choice. But her academic publications co-authored with self-advocates, people from the movement, people with intellectual impairment. So she involved them in the analysis, in the co-authorship. If she's presenting at a conference, she's co-presenting. It's possible to co-produce work in really exciting ways that makes your academic publications more interesting to reviewers because they're more innovative methodologically, or they're more grounded in reality. But there is tension, I agree. So if you're working particularly in a policy context, so my colleagues here will know, we spent years producing many policy-based reports which are not reviewed in academic publications. Some of those have real impact in the world and are not always valued by universities in the same way. But then you just have to translate.
We have another question.
If I can just, sorry Anna, en français. It just happened that I'm besides Mark, so I took the microphone. I agree with what you said, Mark, but there is a tension, and not all contexts are the same. And in some countries it might be more difficult to do so than in others. For example, when we were here in Portugal during the austerity years, there were huge financial crises that also impacted universities. and there was a big pressure with the downsizing in terms of the number of faculty members and lots of work. And this kind of work also takes more time. So it takes more time to do all this negotiation, to do this sharing of information, going and coming back, and in the end preparing different kinds of outputs from the project, some that are perhaps more academic, some that are more targeted to the organizations, and so all of that takes time, takes resources, and it's not always easy. It's definitely the way. That's not a question about that. But I think it should be acknowledged that in some contexts it might really be difficult, and it might create dilemmas for the researchers as well as for the organizations. So I just want to add that.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Hannah, I think one last question.
Your left. Your left. Your
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Paula. That was partly what I was going to add as well. And I think maybe the problem is, or the phrase "at the disposal of" is maybe a bit confusing, because although it should be that way around, that research is responding to where the needs are, as identified by disabled people's organisations. Researchers may need a bit of time to respond, so they can't immediately drop. The time is often fully committed already, so it's sometimes difficult to respond immediately. There often isn't the fluid capacity to respond immediately. So if there's time planning things in, that's not easy to work into those structures. So yeah, I think.
Do you want to? Last question? Yes.
I can add to that, but it's around there from my stand. I was going to actually address that in the last panel, so maybe I'll just hold on to them. But briefly, I can say that the research that the disabled people's movement or organizations are most interested in are small, practical mapping studies that say so many people in equality who are disabled, so many people are unemployed, they've been used to argue and inadequacy. This is not the kind of research that is acknowledged within the university. As academics, if you want to make it, it's basically purpose of Paris. That is the reality we live with. And we cannot just publish reports that are advocacy oriented. We have to publish in international referee journals. Otherwise, we do not keep our jobs. So, what is required and expected of us as academics is very different than what is most helpful for GPOs. So we have to somehow live with that, and usually it means that we do things outside our strict academic rules, because you cannot expect to work with GPOs if you do not engage with them, work with them, advocate with them, are ready to, you call it at their disposal, come speak at the conferences, collaborate on how do we advocate for this or that, how do we write a salary report, so on and so forth. So it's just not just the research, it's also who are you in relation to the GPOs and disabled people in your country. So it's just, you have to work with people on more than just research, otherwise it just doesn't work for, collaborative issues. And usually it takes longer, you have to be quite committed and willing to do a lot of things on weekends and on whatever. So, but it is extremely rewarding. That is why we do it. And we do it out of passion. passion for social change and social justice. So don't take this as a complaint. This is what makes my life as an academic livable, because dry academic life is not life.
Reactions to this last couple of questions and comments? No? Okay, so we are approaching the end of this round table. I thank Megan Smith, Clarke, and Jerome Bickenbach for this wonderful time with us and their experience and insights. I have the role to summarize a little bit what has been said. It is a very complex and difficult task, as you comprehend. So I will tell you this in Portuguese, if you don't mind. So, não. Bom, falamos da pesquisa participativa e emancipatória, que trata-se, no fundo, de produzir conhecimento, co-produzir conhecimento, que resulta em benefício para as pessoas que são, ao mesmo tempo, investigadas, mas também investigadoras. Esta é a ideia essencial. E que são pessoas que estão numa situação de vulnerabilidade, num contexto de opressão. Isto aplica-se não apenas aos estudos sobre a deficiência, mas a todo o tipo de estudos que envolvem esta abordagem. E o que se pretende é, de facto, produzir uma ciência que não é uma ciência de outra, mas é uma ciência comprometida, civicamente comprometida, com os princípios dos direitos humanos, da dignidade humana, e promovendo o empowerment das pessoas que participam nestes processos de investigação. Quando aplicado aos estudos da deficiência, tem como pressuposto o modelo social da deficiência, e, portanto, uma transição, como aqui foi referido, de modelos anteriores, como o modelo médico, para o modelo social. E esta abordagem tem uma grande vantagem. Duas grandes vantagens. Por um lado, permite que as próprias pessoas com deficiência tenham uma voz e uma capacidade de co-decisão. E de co-decisão não apenas sobre aquilo que elas dizem como sujeitos de investigação, mas uma palavra sobre o objeto, sobre o design metodológico, sobre as fontes de financiamento dessa investigação e sobre os resultados e o modo como se divulgam os resultados. E, portanto, digamos que é uma capacidade de co-decisão ao longo de todo o processo. Por outro lado, tem a segunda grande vantagem, é que tende a remover as relações hierárquicas entre quem investiga e quem é investigado, prevenindo que as pessoas com deficiência sejam instrumentalizadas no próprio processo de investigação. Claro que isto levanta questões éticas delicadas. Qualquer investigação levanta questões éticas delicadas, algumas gerais, não é? Quem investiga na área das ciências humanas e na área das ciências exatas também, investiga com seres humanos e com animais. Mas quem lida com seres humanos tem aqui uma responsabilidade bem excessiva, que é o caso das ciências sociais. E as questões e problemas éticos que se colocam podem ser enumerados de forma muito geral, de forma aqui referidas: o consentimento informado, a confidencialidade e o anonimato, os riscos para a saúde e para a segurança das pessoas quando são investigadas, a investigação de temas sensíveis. Falámos aqui da questão do aborto forçado, da violência, sobre experiências de violência, a clarificação, a transparência dos métodos adotados, a questão da proteção de dados e a questão da apresentação, da disseminação e do uso dos resultados. Isto são questões gerais de todas as investigações, que naturalmente também se relacionam com as investigações participativas e emancipatórias. Qual é a grande diferença? Há aqui dois ou três aspectos, muitos deles foram aqui referidos. Acho que se pode resumir no seguinte. Nós temos que evitar o risco de estigmatização, portanto, dupla estigmatização de pessoas com deficiência que já se encontram numa situação potencial de vulnerabilidade e, portanto, precisam de ser protegidas neste contexto. Também a questão de se desenvolverem parcerias que não são verdadeiras parcerias. Ela chamava token partnership. Ou que são parcerias pretensamente igualitárias, não são. Também a questão da criação das falsas expectativas nas pessoas. Portanto, resulta numa má negociação da participação das pessoas com deficiência nestes processos. Enfim, podíamos enumerar vários outros aspectos mais específicos, mas penso que estes serão os principais. E, portanto, resta-me também agradecer a minha participação, desejar a todos e a todas um bom trabalho, um resto de um dia proveitoso. Uma palavra em especial para os doutorandos, os estudantes de doutoramento do projeto DER, que vençam as dificuldades, agora mesmo também para os meus dois alunos, com os quais tive o gosto de participar no semestre anterior, e que foi uma experiência muito interessante tê-los também no contexto do grupo dos doutorandos, de todos os outros estudantes que tiveram a participação muito relevante. O meu agradecimento para eles. E, portanto, boa sorte e bons trabalhos, seja com uma abordagem participativa e emancipatória ou não. Muito obrigado.